Hello and good afternoon. I'm going to give a few minutes just to allow for some additional participants to log in from if they had some other obligations that came up until noon. So at 12:05, I'll do a full introduction and then we'll get the brown bag started. Thank you.
Hi, Suzanne.
Jill, how are you?
How are you? Good. How are you doing?
Good.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
I need to get back to mindfulness, so I'm glad you're doing this for us. So I greatly appreciate it.
Oh, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for joining in.
Sure. I'm going to turn my video off, but I just want to kind of make an appearance for you.
I appreciate it. Thanks. It's really nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. Stay well.
Okay, you too. I'll do my best.
Okay, welcome everyone to our brown bag presentation today. Understanding the Principles of Mindfulness. We have with us virtually Suzanne Resnick, who is a program instructor, with the Connor Integrative Health Network here at University Hospitals. Suzanne is an independent mindfulness teacher, speaker, and coach, as well as a coordinator of mindfulness programming for the Connor UH Network. She has her master's degree in education and social work and is trained in teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction, as well as in teaching mindfulness to children's K through 12. Susan is a licensed social worker and has been teaching mindfulness since 2011. In her current role, Suzanne teaches classes for the public, organizations, universities, corporations, hospital employees, and medical students. She gives wellness talks, creates mindfulness curricula, coaches individuals, and takes part in research studies, some of which have been funded by the NIH. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Angela. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for being here and for having me speak with you today about mindfulness. I thought what I'd like to do is talk a little bit. Well, first, I should say that in terms of programming, what we're doing right now at Connor, all of our classes are virtual. So you can take the classes from anywhere you are, which has been really actually surprisingly very nice. We are also offering free meditations twice a week. So on Tuesdays at noon and on Thursdays at 1:30. And I'm going to send the flyer to Angela so she can pass that out via email to all of you, because there are direct links on there, and you just sign in and you can be part of a group who are meditating together live, which is really nice. It's only 15 minutes. And then the classes I teach are 8 weeks. They're an 8-week series. There's Introduction to Mindfulness, and then there's a Mindfulness 2 class for those of you who've taken the Mindfulness intro. And we'll be starting a new series in January. So if you're interested in that, I will also pass that information along to Angela as well. And as employees of university hospitals, you get wellness points for taking part in all of these things. So that's also a nice added bonus. So today I thought what I'd like to do is talk in general terms about the benefits of mindfulness, what it is and how it works. And then we'll talk about how to practice it, and we'll do a little practice. But I want you to feel free to jump in should you have questions. It is hard for me to answer questions in writing in the chat, but if you have a question that you want to type in the chat, I can answer it verbally. And if you want to just take yourself off mute, you can also ask me a question out loud. So, there's been about 35 years, more than 35 years of research now into the benefits of mindfulness. And that research has shown that it can positively impact things like blood pressure, depression and anxiety, attention, focus and memory, pain, stress, emotional reactivity, compassion for ourselves and others, and our overall sense of well-being, which is kind of a lot, right? That's a lot of stuff that you can positively impact through practicing mindfulness. And stress, for example, is a huge issue, right? It's a huge issue for all of us, because not only does it impact our well-being, but it also impacts our physical health, because we know that stress is either the cause or the exacerbator of all illness. So really, one of those things that mindfulness helps us manage is stress. And I think that's a huge issue now, as well as usually, but especially now. So recognizing our own stress and then learning ways to manage it more effectively can be super helpful, not just to our, as I said, our emotional and physical well-being, but our health. So if you talk about the definition of mindfulness, it's kind of hard to define, but the best definition I've found is one from Jon Kabat-Zinn. And he says that mindfulness is a way of paying attention to the present moment on purpose, non-judgmentally, which sounds like a really great idea. It's just that it's not normally anything we do. We have the capacity to do those things. We're just not normally doing them, because if we stop to notice what we're thinking, we don't usually stop to notice what we're thinking. But if we do, we might notice we're somewhere in the future, we're planning or we're anticipating something to come. We might be worried or anxious about something in the future, or we're in the past, remembering, rehearsing something that's already happened, maybe regretting something. So even though we know we can't live in the future, we know we can't live in the past, we know that this is the only moment we have. If we're not present for the only moment we have, the question then becomes, when is it that we're living our lives? You know, there's that old saying that life is what's happening while you're busy making other plans. And that really is true for most of us. We're constantly making plans or rehearsing something that's already happened, rather than actually being here in this moment where, you know, if you're seated in a chair, your rear end is in this chair. You can feel your breath coming and going. You can feel the places of contact, maybe for your hands, for your feet. You can hear the sound of my voice. That's what's actually happening right now in this present moment. It turns out that when we are constantly in the future or the past, we really don't manage our emotions and our stress very well. And you can see how that might be, right? If we can bring ourselves into the present moment, the studies are showing that we can really touch into what is good about the present moment, what is fine about the present moment, what is safe about the present moment. And that helps us gain perspective, and that can be really helpful. The thing is, as I said, it's not our normal way of acting or thinking, and so we need to train in certain ways of working with our thoughts and emotions that then become more helpful. So if we talk about training our minds, we want to increase our awareness and the quality of attention we pay. Increased awareness and a higher quality of attention that we pay. And I like to talk about the studies that Dr. Richard Davidson has done at the University of Wisconsin at Madison. He runs a place called the Center for Healthy Minds. And he is the professor of psychology and psychiatry and researches the neural bases of emotion and emotion styles. So he also, what's intriguing to me is he really researches methods to promote human flourishing. And he has found that there are certain characteristics that we as human beings need for human flourishing. And that is awareness, connection, insight, and purpose. And he has found that by practicing mindfulness, we can actually achieve those things. And the key word there, though, is practice, right? So we have trained ourselves in the way that we are now, which is more reactive as opposed to responsive. It is less aware, and there is a lower quality of attention that we're paying. And this is just something that we've learned over time. So the idea is, though, that we can actually also learn to do other things, to have this increased awareness and to have this higher quality of attention, that we have the capacity to train ourselves in those things. And that in fact, we all already come with that equipment. We don't need to go out and buy anything special. We don't need special clothing. We don't even need a special place. We already have everything we need. We just need some training in order to strengthen these muscles, if you will, of awareness and attention. So if we sort of break down these ideas that Dr. Davidson has discussed, these ideas of awareness, connection, insight, and purpose. Awareness is, you know, our ability to focus, resist distraction. It's also meta awareness. And by that, he means knowing what our minds are doing, awareness of our own thinking. And it's really necessary for transformation. Right? We have to be aware of what our own minds are doing if we want to be able to encourage ourselves to think in healthier, more helpful ways. There was actually a huge study that showed that 47% of the time we are mind wandering. 47% of the time. So what they did is they checked in with people and they said, what are you doing right now? And where is your mind? Is your mind on what you're doing right now? And they found that 47% of the time, People were not focused on what they were doing at that moment. And in fact, that this mind wandering led to unhappiness. When people are not focused on what they're doing in the present moment, they tend to be less happy. So that is really significant for us to start to notice that this mind wandering is really unhelpful to our overall sense of well-being and happiness. And then we look at connection. We as human beings really thrive on connection. We are social creatures and we're meant to be in connection with others. It is actually a physiological regulator for us to be connected with others. And qualities of kindness and compassion, those are really things that encourage satisfying connections. Because remember, we're talking about not just the connection itself, but the quality of the connection. So if we want higher quality connection, we need to be kind, we need to be compassionate, but also we need to start with compassion and kindness for ourselves. Because what we're finding is that when we can be kind and compassionate with ourselves, we find it much easier to be kind and compassionate with others. Because we start to understand, one, we are right, we're more aware. So we're more aware of our own thoughts. We start to understand that, oh, this is the way I think. We can generalize that other people might also think this way. We start to understand our own emotions and how they impact us. And we can start to understand, oh, other people have these emotions and they may be similarly impacted by these emotions. And we start to be able to feel more connected with others. We're not feeling so isolated. We recognize the humanity in our own individual experience so that we recognize that we share this with other human beings and it helps us feel more connected. And then there's insight, right? So healthy relationship to our own inner narrative. So when I say inner narrative, what kind of thing do you think of? Anybody want to volunteer? What do you think of when I say inner narrative?
Could be the
Self-talk.
stories we tell ourselves
Yes, yes.
over and over sometimes.
Right, exactly, Barbara. So it's the stories we tell ourselves. And Carol says our thoughts, yes. And someone else says self-talk. Yes, that's all true, right? We tell ourselves stories, and these stories aren't necessarily true. And oftentimes the voice we use with ourselves, the narrator that we use in our own heads, is not particularly kind. If you think about it, we often speak to ourselves in a way that we wouldn't actually speak to someone we loved or cared about. We might not even speak this way to someone we don't know very well. We speak to ourselves in a way that is harsh and critical quite often. And studies show that, positive change comes from a place of encouragement and kindness and patience rather than from this harsh inner critic. So mindfulness can help us recognize the helpfulness versus the unhelpfulness of our inner narrative, our own thoughts. We can check into the legitimacy of our own thoughts, quite honestly, right? Are they helpful? Are they unhelpful? Are they true? Are they not true? Because our inner narrative, just like all the rest of our thoughts, are just thoughts. Just because we think that, just because we think a thought, doesn't make it true. And so even if we just recognize that, just that issue, right, that the thought is not necessarily true, that can really help us gain perspective and make different choices about how we respond, not just to what's happening outside of us, but also what is happening with that inner narrative, with our own thoughts. And then lastly, there's purpose, right? We all need to have a sense of purpose. And what I have found in teaching is that often we don't check in with what is our sense of purpose. We don't stop and reflect or evaluate on any basis, with regularity. What is our purpose and our sense of meaning? Where do we find meaning? What would we like to be seeing more of in our own lives? And if we don't know what that is, then it's very hard for us to direct our lives toward it, right? So once we establish what it is we want for ourselves, what we find meaning in, then we find through mindfulness that we have the ability to make choices that help us guide our lives in that direction, right? Because in mindfulness, we're learning this increased awareness, this higher quality of attention. We're creating a space, if you will, between the stimulus and the response. So that in that little space, you recognize that you have options for the way that you respond. You can make choices that are more likely then to align you with what it is you find important and meaningful and purposeful in your life. Because most often, when I talked about the definition of mindfulness, I said, this is not normally the way that we operate, because when we're lost in thought, when our minds are distracted, we are in what I like to call the autopilot, right? We're just moving from habit to habit, from reaction to reaction. We're not likely to be allowing that pause where we're making the choice. And so we're acting out of this reflex or habit. And we all know that we have helpful habits, but we all have unhelpful habits. And that goes for our minds as well. We have unhelpful ways of thinking, unhelpful ways of reacting. And if we don't have that pause, we're not making intentional choices. So we can end up having reactions to situations and to our thoughts that are actually unhelpful to us, that actually do not serve our larger sense of purpose and meaning. And that then impacts our overall sense of well-being in a negative way. Is this making sense for everybody? Does anybody have thoughts or questions or comments right now? Okay, so this idea of recognizing our own thoughts as we're having them and then choosing the response we have to them really does take practice. And when I talk about practice, we have to practice in order to create a new habit, right? We've just talked about the fact that we have habits or reflexive ways of reacting to things, and those things happen over time with repetition, right? We create these habits through repetition. We actually create neuronal pathways in our minds that are these habits. And it means that these pathways enable us to react in a more reflexive way. So it's a much more immediate reaction rather than a reaction that requires thought or pause. So it's something that just happens automatically. So if we want to create new habits, new ways of responding, then it does take practice in order to create new neuronal pathways, new ways that become new habits, new reflexes that sort of allow the old habits to weaken as the new habits strengthen. And what's great about this is that these are habits of your choosing, not just default habits that happen by accident over time. These are habits that you're creating by choice, and that helps you feel more empowered in your life. So when I talk about practice, there is the informal practice where we bring mindfulness into our days many times in different ways. And then there's the formal practice, which is meditation. And in our classes, for example, we learn in intro, we learn the breath meditation. We learn a body scan where we're scanning through the body region by region, really tapping into whatever we notice in those different regions as we go. And then we also learn the loving kindness practice, which is a compassion practice. So there are those forms of meditation. And then in the Mindfulness 2 class, we learn what is called an open awareness or choiceless awareness meditation. We learn to focus on individual things, not just the breath, but we can focus on the body, we can focus on sounds, we can focus on thoughts. All of those things can be anchors, if you will, for our attention and meditation. But then there's this way of having a choiceless awareness or an open awareness where we allow ourselves to become aware of whatever's happening as it happens without getting caught up and pulled away by our thoughts. So in all of these practices, we are noticing that our minds think. Mindfulness is not about clearing the decks, having no thoughts, because the mind is designed to think. So the idea, though, is to notice when the mind has wandered off your chosen anchor, and then consciously choosing to bring it back to that anchor again, right? So we're training ourselves in that attention. We're strengthening that muscle of attention, being able to choose what we pay attention to. What we pay attention to is what we fill our lives with. So it is hugely important. And as human beings, we have the capacity to make that choice, to choose what we pay attention to. I like to use my dog as an example of, a creature who does not have the choice of what he pays attention to, right? He sees a squirrel, he chases that squirrel. It doesn't matter if he has a bandage on his paw. There is no intervening thought about maybe not a good idea right now. No, it's see squirrel, chase squirrel. We want to be able to exercise that intervening moment where we have a choice of where we place our attention, choosing not to chase the squirrel, and instead placing our attention on something else that we find more helpful. That is a conscious choice. So it really does require that we have a stronger muscle of attention so that we can use it when we need it. Because like any other muscle, we have it, but if we don't strengthen it, it's not as useful to us. And then as we sit in meditation, for example, we might start to notice, well, what kinds of thoughts do I have most often? What does it feel like in my body when my mind wanders? What do certain thoughts, what are the impacts my certain thoughts have on my body? So we're really starting to understand the connection between the mind and the body, because the body, one, is always in the present moment. So we can always use it to anchor us in the present moment, using our senses. But also our bodies give us a lot of information that can really help us, can inform those choices that I mentioned before, those conscious choices about where to place our attention. Those, it can really help us recognize the helpful from the unhelpful. What does it feel like in my body when I'm making unhelpful decisions or when I'm having unhelpful thoughts? And what does it feel like in my body when the opposite is true? So when we talk about the more informal practices of mindfulness, we are bringing our awareness to doing what we're doing when we're doing it, anytime throughout the day, because any activity at all can be done with mindful attention. Washing your hands, walking, anything, literally anything, washing the dishes, showering, right? Being in the shower when you're in the shower rather than already being at work in your mind. Being in the car and driving rather than already at your destination or still at the place you've left just a few minutes ago. Just being present for the moments of your life that you have is a way of training the mind. Because again, you'll notice in that activity that you're doing that your mind will get pulled away by thoughts. It's not a problem. We don't need to judge ourselves for that. That's normal. The idea, though, is to notice as soon as you can that that's what's happened, and then patiently guide the attention back to doing whatever it is you're doing. So I like to use the example, and any of you who've taken my class or heard me talk, I always use the example of dishwashing, because it really, for me, illuminates many of the points I'm making. So dishwashing for me is one of those mundane tasks that I just dislike. I don't like it. There are a lot of mundane tasks I don't like, but this is just one of them. So dishwashing for me is just one of those things I try to avoid. And then when I go to do it, I play the same message to myself, essentially, that I've been playing probably since I was 15. And this was my chore at home, which goes something like, I don't want to do this. This is gross. I have other things I'd rather be doing. Somebody else should be doing this. There's too many pots. There's too much stuff, blah, 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 right? It's the same recording over and over. So this is a strong mental habit for me, a strong habitual reaction to this situation of dishwashing. So if I grumpily wash my way through the dishes, hurrying to get them out of the way because they're a nuisance, then I go to do something else, like maybe back in the day, help my daughter with her homework. So I've been grumpy about the dishwashing. I go to help my daughter with her homework. And what happens? What does she perceive this grumpiness to be? What do you think? Grumpy towards her. Yeah, absolutely. Rachel says grumpy towards her. Celeste says that you don't enjoy helping her. Exactly. And Lilium says you are upset. Absolutely. None of which is true. And Leslie says that she's a bother. Again, all correct, but none of which is true, right? None of those things are true about how I feel about my daughter or helping her with her homework. It only has to do with my irritation about dishwashing, right? And in fact, when we look back, we look at meaning and purpose. My sense of meaning and purpose, one of the things I find most meaningful is family. I'm not acting in ways that connect me with that meaning and purpose in this interaction with my daughter, right? So not only do I feel kind of lousy because I'm grumpy, but now I've shared it with my daughter because that's just what we do as human beings, unconsciously, right? Not through conscious choice. I have shared my grumpiness with her, and now she's going to take it with her, and maybe she'll pick a fight with her sister because she's a little grumpy now. And maybe I'll carry it into the den where my unsuspecting husband is sitting, and I'll be snappish with him, right? Maybe pick on him a little bit because I'm still grumpy about dishwashing. And further, then when I go to bed that night, if I look back on my day, this whole scenario will negatively impact the way I view my day. I might see my day as being kind of lousy when in fact, the rest of the day might have been perfectly fine. So you can see how these little habits of mind, these little ways that we talk to ourselves, can really impact our overall sense of well-being. They can really derail us from the path that leads us toward what we find meaningful and purposeful in our lives. And it seems like it's no big deal, right? That I don't like dishwashing. And it isn't. What's the big deal is how I choose to respond to it. I don't need to decide suddenly that I love dishwashing or start to guilt trip myself about, well, I should feel lucky to have dishes to wash, or you're being ridiculous, Suzanne, this is just a task you have to do. None of that self-talk actually makes me feel any better. It actually just makes me feel worse. So that's not really what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is as I begin to wash the dishes and I notice that scenario, that mental habit show up in my mind, all I need to do is notice it. I don't need to harshly criticize or judge myself. I'm just noticing. And instead of going on with that train of thought, I bring my attention into the present moment by using my senses. So smelling the smell of the soap, what's the fragrance? Noticing the temperature of the water. My mind wanders and I notice that it's wandered. Again, no criticism, just noticing, coming back, feeling the weight of the pot in my hand, seeing what I see out my window. Mind wanders, coming back, seeing the suds in the sink, hearing the sound of the water, hearing the sound of the pots clanging. Mind wanders, I come back, feeling the places of contact from my feet, feeling my breath. Mind wanders, I come back. Leslie's typing in, I need the last 2 minutes of this information in a note or message to pass on to my sister. She does this with the kids and hubby. I notice she is unhappy and dwells on things. Yeah, and I think that it's interesting because even if you go back to my example of dishwashing, I might feel perfectly justified about being grumpy about dishwashing, right? I have daughters, I have a husband, I have a dog. No, he can't do dishes, but but I have these other people in the house who could be helping me with the dishes, right? So your sister may feel justified in being grumpy or cranky or irritable about certain things. The fact is, though, that I'm the one who's suffering, right? By being cranky about the dishwashing, I'm creating suffering for myself. And then I inadvertently share it with others without meaning to. But it's not accomplishing anything. It's not changing anything. It's just creating suffering. So if I wanted to change things, I might choose another time, right? A time that is more conducive to discussion and sit down with my family and say, look, this is the situation. I really would like some help with the dishes. Can we figure out a way to work this out, right? So that's a more respectful and intentional way that helps me connect with my sense of meaning and purpose in family, right? And my sense of value of mutual respect and kindness, right? So that is a much more intentional way of addressing the subject. This is not the unintentional, accidental sort of way of willy-nilly just being grumpy with everybody and creating suffering for myself and for others. So really, mindfulness has to do with noticing our unhelpful habits and seeing if there is something else we can choose to pay attention to. And then also we can start to notice, what are ways that I can accomplish what I'd like to do in a way that helps me connect with my sense of meaning and purpose? Can I notice in the moments where I'm sharing my crabbiness, for example, that in fact I'm suffering, right? That it's unpleasant. It's an unpleasant feeling for me. And I'm creating unpleasantness or suffering for others, which is also not my intention and not my desire. So it's this increased awareness and higher quality of attention that we're paying to the tasks at hand, so that we're making conscious choices about where we're placing our attention. Because then, not just when you're washing dishes, but in other things, other parts of your life, these kinds of habits of mind trickle in, right? Because you're strengthening that muscle of awareness and attention, so that then when you go in other aspects of your life, you can bring that same mindfulness there. You've learned it in the meditation. You've trained your mind. As your mind wanders, you bring it back. You've noticed your own mind, your own mental habits. You've noticed when you've created a sense of unpleasantness or suffering for yourself in your body and in your mind. And then you notice when you're doing the dishes, when you're walking, when you're brushing your teeth, that your mind wanders and you can bring it back over and over and over again, just using your senses to do that. Because as I said, the body is always in the present moment. So when we can use that, we bring ourselves into the present moment. We give ourselves a little moment for reset, for reboot, where we can gain some perspective and remind ourselves that we have options for the ways that we respond. We can calm our minds and bodies, because our bodies can be calmed, and then we have more access to our critical thinking, right? Because the stress response really does sort of disable, to one degree or another, our ability to think clearly. So if we can calm our bodies, we can calm our minds, bringing our attention into the present moment, feeling those places of contact, and then also doing some breathing can really help us come into the present, calm the body, access clearer thinking. So when we do the meditation that I'll guide you through in a few moments, you'll notice that we start with noticing places of contact. We start with deep breaths where we breathe in deeply and exhale slowly. This slow exhale can really stimulate the parasympathetic nervous system, the part of our bodies that calms our overall nervous system, right? So the sympathetic nervous system excites and the parasympathetic nervous system calms. So we want to try and balance those two. And with the breath, we can really help to do that. And then we have more access to our clearer thinking. And in meditation, we start to recognize what our minds are doing. So does anybody have any thoughts or questions at this point? Anybody have questions about, oh, let's see. Emily's typing in. Oh, sorry, go ahead if somebody was going to speak.
I have a question, Suzanne, about how to incorporate mindfulness during the day at work or after work. Sometimes after work, I'm so tired, I'm not as able to be as disciplined to do it at night after I come home from work. So any recommendations about during the day?
Yes, excellent question. So, it does require some amount of effort, this practice, right? Because it is going to require, meditation is going to require us to carve out a certain amount of time every day, because it's the dailiness, right? The repetition of this daily practice that creates these new mental habits, this new higher quality of attention and higher level of awareness. So it doesn't have to be an hour on a cushion with your, arms in a certain, your hands in a certain position and your legs folded into a pretzel shape. It doesn't have to be any of that. But it does require at least a few minutes of relative quiet where you can sit and be less likely to be interrupted. So oftentimes I recommend first thing in the morning, because it isn't really going to impact the length of time you have to sleep if you get up and you have maybe 10 minutes for meditation, right? That's not going to really negatively impact your sleep. So getting up just a few minutes early and doing 10 minutes of meditation, maybe after you've brushed your teeth or had a glass of water, so you sort of wake yourself up a little bit, and then sitting to meditate. You can use a recorded or guided meditation, or you can just sit, as you'll see in a few minutes, you can just sit and notice your breath, right? You can just set a timer for yourself. You can do it at any time during the day that you find helpful, or most convenient. And we want to be flexible, right? But it's really most helpful if it's the same time every day. Now, for all of us, that doesn't always work. One of my students is a nurse who works different shifts, so she can't possibly commit to the same time every day, but she can commit to right before she goes to work. That will be her everyday meditation, right? Or right after work, whatever time that might be. So it's the same time of day for you, or it's the same place in the day, kind of, whatever works for you best. But creating this new habit for yourself is sort of the best way to ensure success. And as far as this, when we do mindful activities throughout the day, that doesn't have to take any longer than it would otherwise. We have to wash our hands for 20 seconds anyway. We may as well be present for the activity, right? You may as well notice the temperature of the water and the fragrance of the soap. Notice your mind wanders, and then come back again, feeling the soap, slippery in your hands, hearing the sound of the water, seeing what you see, mind wanders, you come back. So it doesn't have to be a big deal, but it can be helpful to commit to doing the same exact activity, at least as you start to create this new habit for yourself. So every day, every time I wash my hands this week, it's going to be mindfully. Then you're less likely to forget. And I have a couple people writing in. Let's see. One question is, it is easier to take care of others and to do what we can to make them happy. I think sometimes feel guilty taking time for ourselves. Yeah, I have a bad habit of thinking of the things that may be things I cannot control. Example, my dog passing, hubby getting hurt at work, or work family getting sick. Absolutely. And I think that we all really suffer from those same exact ailments, if you will. So recognizing that those things that you're describing are just part of being a human being. So you're not alone. You're not, some neurotic. You're just a human being who's experiencing human suffering, and that you share that with your fellow human beings. So you're not isolated, right? Because remember, we need to feel connection, even if it is in this small way, recognizing that we're not alone in our suffering. And then recognizing that it's unhelpful. Just over and over bringing kindness and patience to yourself, because this habit of thought is something that you've learned over years, probably, right? It isn't something that just came upon you overnight. And so it won't go away or weaken in strength overnight. It's going to take practice, and it's going to take patience, and it's going to take kindness, just like you would use with someone you love and care about, someone who's really important to you. And it turns out that really taking care of ourselves but taking care of ourselves really strengthens our ability to take care of others. That when we put money in our own banks, we have more to lend to others. And mindfulness in particular tends to be this sort of reciprocal loop where we are more open to receiving the love and kindness that comes our way every day. And that helps us put money in our banks. We are kinder and more patient with ourselves. That puts money in our banks. And then when others need us, from moment to moment, we have money to give, right? We have kindness to give. There's just this reciprocal loop that is constantly moving in and out. A constant resupply and engagement and giving. So we can start to recognize when our anticipatory thoughts about tragedies that may or may not happen are really not helpful, but in fact are negatively impacting our ability to be present with those people or pets in the moment that they are actually here with us, healthy and alive. That can really be a helpful way to recognize that we're creating our own suffering, we're taking ourselves away from the present, and we're creating an inability for us to connect really fully with other people. I don't know, Leslie, if that is helpful. All right, anybody else have any other questions? Because I do want to take a few minutes to do a little meditation so you get a kind of a taste for it. But I'm happy to hear from anybody who has thoughts or questions. Okay, so then we'll get started. If you're seated in a chair, I'm going to ask you to place both your feet flat on the floor. And then I'm also going to ask you to bring your back away from the back of the chair. We want to be able to support our own posture in meditation. This just encourages our bodies and minds to be alert so that we don't nod off, right? Sleep doesn't count for meditation. So we want to be alert and encourage ourselves to be alert. So you'll bring your back away from the back of the chair, elongating your spine as best you can, but we don't want to be rigid or stiff. The shoulders can be down and back, so you have a nice open chest. You can place your hands on your thighs or in your lap. And then if you're comfortable closing your eyes, you can do that. Otherwise, softening the gaze is also fine, maybe just looking downward. And we'll take a nice deep breath in. And then we'll exhale very slowly through the nose. We breathe in and out through the nose, if it's possible. Breathing in very deeply, feeling those sensations of fullness in the belly and in the chest, and then exhaling very slowly. Shoulders dropping a little more. Breathing in very deeply once more, feeling the sensations of fullness, and exhaling very slowly. The body settling. breath can return to its natural flow now. And we bring our full awareness to the places of contact for the feet. The places where the body is making contact with whatever you're sitting on. And feeling into the places of contact for the hands, the fingers, the palms. Feeling the alertness of the posture, softening the face, the forehead, the jaw. Softening the belly, feeling the belly expanding as you breathe in and falling back again as you breathe out. There's no need to change the way you breathe. Just allowing the breath to be natural. See if you can become aware now of the place where you notice the breath the most. Maybe that's the nose, or it might be the movement of the chest or the abdomen. Just gently resting the attention there in that place where you feel it the most. And then seeing if you can be present with the sensations of each breath there. Each breath as it comes and goes. Taking it one breath at a time. Can you be present with one breath from the very beginning of the in-breath all the way through to the end of the out-breath?
Alexa, show me the driveway. Okay.
You may notice the mind wandering off, which is totally normal and fine. The idea, though, is to notice as soon as you can that the mind has wandered, and then patiently guide the attention back to the sensations of the breath in the body. If it's helpful, you can make a soft mental note of in on the in-breath, out on the out-breath. Checking in with the attitude we bring to the practice. Seeing if we can encourage ourselves to have an attitude of curiosity and interest about our experience as we sit, but also kindness and patience. Breathing in, aware that you're breathing in. Breathing out, aware that you're breathing out. Noticing the mind wandering and coming back over and over. And when you're ready, opening your eyes. Okay, everybody. Well, that was it. That's the big deal. You can easily, as you see, do this on your own. You can also find recordings. There are many, many apps. I would recommend a free app called Insight Timer. That is a very nice app, and you can search mindfulness meditations and find a bazillion. There are also apps that you can pay for, and I'm happy to send anybody information. Just email me. I'm also happy to send you any kind of materials, information about books or anything else you might like. So don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions. But if anybody has any questions right now, I'm happy to hear from you. Oh, thank you. Thanks to everybody for your kind thank yous. I have a note. Suzanne, so great to hear your soothing voice again. Thank you. I'd forgotten, oops, I just passed it up again. I'd forgotten about how to capture this piece during these challenging times. Yeah, it is really important that we do this for ourselves. And so I'm going to encourage you guys just to give it a try and be patient with yourselves. And then somebody's asking about the evaluation. So I don't know if maybe Angela can answer that question better than I can.
Yes, Suzanne, thank you so much for your presentation today. In regards to the evaluations, those can just be emailed to me. My email address is on the evaluation itself. I will be sending out a follow-up email after this with the handouts that Suzanne mentioned for Connor programs coming up, and then how to get your points on the UH Wellness site. So thank you everyone for attending our brown bag today. And Suzanne, again, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation.
Of course, thanks so much for having me, and thank you all so much for being here. I really appreciate it. It's lovely to be together, even if it's virtual.